You know, a good reminder from Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 is God always pierces the darkness, always. And the darkness doesn't last.
And the high priest, the great high priest who is Jesus Christ, he puts his hands on your life and you take your hands off and you say, my life is surrendered for your purposes.
All right, Downline, today we are joined by Dr. Jonathan Pennington. When I was studying, doing my doctorate out at Talbot in California at Biola University, I read a book as part of our Christian philosophy called The Sermon on the Mount and Human Flourishing. And it made a lot of sense and tied a lot of things together as it relates to the Sermon on the Mount, which is a really familiar part of Jesus' teaching. And so I reached out, and Dr. Pennington was kind enough to come on to discuss the Sermon on the Mount, how we read it, maybe some ways that are less helpful in reading it, and then we hopefully take that in some really practical directions for discipleship. So sit back, relax, enjoy your flight on the Sermon on the Mount. I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of the Downline podcast. My name is Jamie Trussell. The privilege to serve Downline and as a lead pastor of Redeemer Dripping Springs just outside of Austin. We hope this podcast helps you faithfully walk with Jesus while pouring your life into others. And we are joined today by Dr. Tom Schreiner. Tom, thanks for coming on.
Great to be with you, Jamie. Looking forward to our conversation.
For those that may not be as familiar, now I was going to try to introduce you and give everybody a rundown of everything that you've written. And it's it's so expansive and the list so exhaustive that if you could take a couple minutes and just familiarize our people with kind of who you are and what you're doing and where you're at.
Yeah, I teach at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. I teach New Testament. This is I can't believe this, but now this is my 29th year there, and it's been a privilege. I spent 17 of those years also pastoring as a preaching pastor in a church, Clifton Baptist Church, and the Lord's given me the opportunity to write. So I especially have focused on writing commentaries, and then I've done some work in biblical theology as well.
Yes, well, that's a modest statement, but I will tell our audience we were talking just a little bit before we started recording that your writings have been super helpful for me. Your commentary on Hebrews and on Revelation were particularly noteworthy and beneficial for me. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Happy to be of some help.
Now, something else you've written on, which I find to be a big blessing, is tithing, finances, from a biblical perspective. I mean, you've been in pastoral ministry so much longer than me, but I think for those that grow up in the church, Tom, there is kind of this implied understanding that I'm going to tithe 10%, and that's what God asked me to do, and that's what I'm supposed to do. And it's preached some, it's taught, it's referenced, and yet you make the argument that actually tithing is not a New Testament command, which I think is going to surprise maybe some of our audience. But could you walk us just big picture on reaching that conclusion? Why do we talk about tithing if it's not actually a command in the New Testament? And how do we interact with that as believers?
Yeah, when when we talk about tithing, it's controversial. There are good believers who don't agree with me. So we have to set the table a little bit. I would begin by saying tithing is part of the old covenant, the covenant Yahweh made with Israel, the covenant he made with Israel when he delivered them from Egypt. And that covenant was enacted on Mount Sinai. So we read about that in Exodus. And then the provisions and stipulations of that covenant, right, are found in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and tithing's part of that. It's been very typical for Christians to talk about tithing. I think the good part about that is, for many people, 10% is a generous giving. Now that's good, to give generously, to give 10%. Most people don't give even 10%, so that is remarkable. But if we actually look at the Old Testament, Tithing is tied to supporting the temple, the Levites, the priests. But we know, right? We know from the New Testament there aren't Levites and priests anymore, right? We have one high priest, Jesus. So that whole Levitical system, the temple, that's all passed away in Jesus. Instead, when we read the New Testament, what does the New Testament emphasize? It emphasizes giving generously, sacrificially, so gladly. I'm not arguing, hey, let's give less than a tithe. I'm arguing that actually God doesn't give us a nice, neat little answer. He says to us, each of us, are you giving generously, gladly, and sacrificially? The New Testament never mentions the tithe, not once. Well, wait, I gotta back up. Jesus does mention tithing, but
Right.
there he's talking to the Pharisees, and we have to recognize Jesus lived under the old covenant, right? Jesus and his parents went and sacrificed in the temple. Jesus talked about bringing your offering to the altar. So, some people will turn to Matthew 23 where he mentions tithing and say, well, see, Jesus mentioned tithing, but Jesus isn't talking about a new covenant practice. We know Jesus practiced kosher, the food laws. How do we know that? Because when Peter is told in Acts 10 and 11 in the vision that the food laws aren't necessary, Peter is shocked, right? Obviously, Jesus never even talked to him about it. Peter's absolutely shocked by this.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what then, sorry, so Paul writes his church at Corinth. He talks about being cheerful givers and almost even saying if you're going to give and do it begrudgingly, it would be better not to give in that situation. Or would you say, no, if you can't do it joyfully or generously, still do it, but hope your heart kind of catches up with the actual act?
Yeah, I probably would say that, but you're right. He does say give gladly. What I would want to say is God doesn't need your gifts. We should never sound desperate. God, Philippians 4 is another great chapter on giving. God doesn't need your gifts to advance his kingdom. The question is, are you going to be able to participate in what he's doing? And that isn't fundamentally a duty, it's a privilege. To give for the sake of the kingdom, what a privilege that is. I think that's how we ought to pitch it, because I think that's what the New Testament says. Giving, I don't think he says, if you sow sparingly, you'll reap sparingly. I don't think he's saying, but if you give a lot, you're going to be rich. That's the health and wealth gospel. I think he's saying,
right,
when we give a lot and we're generous, God blesses us. Maybe not with money, right? But he blesses us in other ways. And most of all, he gives us great joy, right? We all know this, right, Jamie? The happiest people on earth, we're the happiest when we're giving, when we're living for Christ's sake and for the sake of others. That brings great joy. There's a beautiful and wonderful joy in that. So, yeah, I think that's the key. So I just say to people, I am not in the business of encouraging people to give less. I'm saying increase your joy by giving sacrificially. Remember, it is sacrificial. That means that you stretch when you give gladly.
Okay.
And I think that means abundantly, right? But I don't set an amount because I don't think the scripture sets an amount. By the way, I didn't say this, Jamie, but the tithe, when you actually look at the Old Testament, it is really, because there's several tithes in the Old Testament, in Leviticus and Numbers.
Right.
It's actually very hard to tell what the number is. It isn't just 10%. When you add the tithes and taxes in Israel, it's anywhere from high 20s to 40% of their money. So the
Oh my Lord.
tithes, a tithe is 10%, but more than one thing is tithe. So
That's right.
I did some study on this. It's super hard to figure out exactly how much they gave, but it was more than 10.
So if you were, I mean, well, let me rephrase it like this. If giving can be tied to an act of worship or response, right? God loved us. He didn't spare his only son. So he who gave his only son, how can he not freely give us all things? And as a response to what he's given, we give back. Part of that is serving the church with our spiritual gifts. Part of that's with our time sacrificially, but certainly part of that's with the treasure piece, right? And our finances.
Right,
Uh,
right.
but would you say that, because I've heard this point made, uh, church discipline cases from churches towards members that don't give over an amount of time, that is there a duty and responsibility to a local church member to give financially first to their church to support the work of the pastors and elders? Or again, is that where, and you wrote a great article for Gospel Coalition, where does tradition and kind of organizational logistics creep in and maybe start to overshadow scripture?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's a good question. I would say yes, I think that is true. I don't know if anybody's ever asked me this before, but I think it is true. When you become no, that's how good of a question it is. Uh, when you become a church member, I think, yeah, your first responsibility is to give to the church, because to become a member of a church, so this would relate more to church membership as it relates to giving. When you become a member of the church, you're committing to fellow members. And I think, yeah, when you look at all that the New Testament says about paying for pastors, leaders, teachers, at least one, at least as much as it, I mean, some churches it's bivocational, right? I think, yes, the first amount you should give should be to your local church. And yeah, if you have a member, I mean, I've never faced this before, so I haven't really thought of this either, but if you have a member who's not giving at all, yeah, I think that would call into question, what does it mean to be a covenant member of the church? Now, what I would want to say is I wouldn't want to specify the amount, but if they're giving
No, right,
nothing, if they're giving
right.
nothing, I don't know what it means to be committed to a church when God commands us to support our leaders, our pastors. I don't know what it means to be a member if you're not supporting those leaders financially, at least with something. If you don't have any money, bring them a dinner once in a while or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, we got my wife Shannon and I got 4 kids. We'll take a pizza.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
So let me put it more directly in this way. Let's say it's not even a church member, but it's somebody's redeemed. They've repented of their sins. They truly trust in the resurrected Jesus. Is it a sin to never give anything? If it's not commanded as a tithe, and Paul seems to offer it, maybe, according to some, as, okay, if you're going to do it, let these things qualify how you do it, but I'm not commanding you to do it. Where does maybe sin creep into our perspective on giving?
yeah, if you're not giving anything, it's definitely a sin. Because he says,
Hmm.
give sacrificially and gladly. I mean, if you're not giving anything, you're obviously not giving sacrificially. What I want to say is what it means to give sacrificially can't be pegged to a number like 10%. But certainly
Oh, sure.
giving zero is not giving sacrificially. I mean,
Well, isn't
like,
the widow's mite a good illustration of that?
yeah. Well, or that's what I'd say again. I mean, we don't, well, for example, we have college students who join our church who don't have a job. We don't,
Hmm.
they don't make any money. Well, I don't think they're sinning. They're not making any money. So if
Hmm.
you're making nothing, you can't give what you don't have. But if you're making $10, I don't know what the amount should be. I don't think the Bible specifies it, but you should give something. You know, if you have some money, you should give sacrificially. And again, what I want to get away from is I don't want to say what that amount is. We're
No,
not
I
all called
appreciate
to.
that.
The widow gave everything she had. Well, I don't think you're commanded to do that. I think that's an
Mm-hmm.
unusual situation, right? Probably none of us have done that, and I think that's okay. I don't think Jesus is
I hope that's
saying in
okay.
that story, "Hey, everybody." I mean, the minute you did that, most of us would need help from somebody else. So,
That's
so I don't
exactly
think
right. Yeah,
that's
we
what
need them
he's.
to give.
Yeah, exactly. So, um, yeah,
Well, does
one thing I
anybody
want to go ahead.
go ahead? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, one thing I want to say is some people say, well, we should tithe because Abraham gave a tenth to Melchizedek and Jacob at Bethel vowed to give a tenth to God. So, because I said, hey, it's in the Mosaic covenant, and they'll say, look, it isn't just in the Mosaic covenant. Both Abraham and Jacob gave a tenth. But I just want to reply to that, and I want to say there's no indication that was a pattern in Abraham's life that he gave a tenth, and or and there's no indication that that was a command, a universal moral norm. Now, if a person chooses, hey, I want to follow that pattern of giving a tenth, I'm fine with that. I just want to say it's not clear from those two passages that that's the mandated amount for everyone. And for some people, it's less than 10%, right? And for some people, it's more. But I don't think those two passages establish that this is a universal moral norm. They're two examples of people giving 10%. So, yeah, people often point to that and what we talked about in terms of Jesus. But I don't think either of those passages are determinative on this matter.
So, no, that's a great word. So, what would you say, right? I can, I've had this question asked and can hear people asking it is, well, I'd be happy to give my money, but I don't trust what the church is going to do with it. Or, hey, our church is pretty affluent. They don't really need my money right now. I'll wait until a need arises. Or, I mean, is that something where you look at them and say, well, then you need to find a church you do want to give to? Or do you say, well, okay, we'll put it in a separate account and wait till a need arises and give it to that? Like, how do you interact with some of these more kind of pragmatic questions people have?
Yeah, I would say you should always be giving regularly and gladly and sacrificially to your
No
church.
matter what. Yeah.
Well,
And if you don't
yeah,
trust your church to give to it,
then you should be in another church. Yeah,
okay, yes. Yeah.
I don't know what that means. If you're in a church and you don't trust your church, that's a really bad situation. Now, you know, we always ought to check our motives. Is that you or is that the church, right? Maybe you're too
Correct.
perfectionistic. Maybe you're expecting pastors to be perfect. You're not, there's no perfect church. But is your church faithful, orthodox? I mean, if you're in a church that is not teaching orthodox Christian teaching, you should leave that church. Or if the
That's right.
pastors are in sin in a very demonstrable way, no pastor is perfect, then you should leave. But if it's a faithful church and they're faithful pastors and you just disagree with them on some things, that's not a good reason not to give.
So would you be comfortable with, church member meets with you, great, faithful, love the church, love its staff. They are giving to the local church. But if you, and by the way, I never see what anyone gives. It's just like pastoral practice for me. I don't have access to any of the information, don't want access to any of the information. But if someone sat down and told me, hey, I give $1,000 a month and I give, 200 to our church and I give 800 to this parachurch organization over here. Is Is that something, because I have people that struggle with, well, if I give to the local church, I don't have much left over for anyone else, but I feel like I should give the primary here and the secondary there and tertiary here. Do you ever get into that with people, or you just think it's a heart kind of worship, spirit-led deal?
I mean, no one's ever asked me that, but I would say, yes, I would say, first of all, we would never practice discipline over this, but I'd say you should give most of your money to the local church. Parachurch
Okay, that's
organizations
straightforward.
aren't in the Bible. The church is.
Mm,
You
okay.
have a responsibility to support your local church. So my advice, if they ask me advice, I'd say give 800 to your local church and 200 to the parachurch.
Yeah, flip that percentage.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're doing that, but I would say to them, that's not the word of the Lord. But
Mm,
I think that fits with the priority of the church. I mean, I have a concern if people are giving more to parachurch organizations than they are to their church. The
mm,
church is, the church is God's idea. So,
sure, sure. So what do you, I mean, I maybe have a gut feeling about what you might say, but right. So I've worked in both. I mean, even at, working at Southern and you doing pastoral ministry for so long, is that there's a contingent of people that would say, well, you know what? I feel like the church isn't really making disciples. It isn't really sharing the gospel. It's not really doing the things God's called it to do. This organization over here is, so I would rather give my money in that direction versus this direction. How do you interact with that thought process?
I would say pray that God would use you to make your church stronger.
That's a good
Because
response.
if the church, ultimately, if the church becomes weaker, those parachurch organizations are eventually going to be weaker. Those parachurch organizations
That's a
are
good point.
ultimately
Yeah.
only going to be as strong as churches are. So, and there's, renewing a church is a wonderful challenge, Now, in every community, you have to decide, where do you go to church? And I know some people don't have much of a choice, but then God's called you to invest in that place and to pray.
That's good.
And maybe you won't see it in your generation. But what about praying and investing and thinking of the future and saying, Lord, Abraham didn't see the full fruits of the promise God gave to him. So, but
No, he didn't.
he was patient and trusted God.
Okay. So switch gears on you just a little bit as it relates to giving. Uh, what is it that makes it so difficult for people to kind of step into this part of their discipleship? I mean, we may want to give our time. We understand God gives us spiritual gifts. We try to serve the church with it, but this one always feels like the weird, tense, uh, kind of embarrassing one to talk about, and can elicit a lot of defensiveness even at times. Why do you think that is, as it relates specifically to money?
Well, we're a very independent culture. We've all grown up in a culture where people don't tell us what to do, especially about money. Money is a very private matter. So we think it makes us nervous for people to talk about that. I think that's part of it. I think another part of it, in terms of giving to a church, we can feel like, I don't see what my money's doing, right? It can feel
Okay.
invisible to us when we give to the church, although it's right there. You're keeping the lights on, you're paying the pastor,
Sure.
you're actually helping in
Sure.
practical ways. But I think it can feel like it's just going into the air. I think that's another dimension of it. But probably the first one's the biggest one. We live in a culture where, like, we don't tell people usually how much money do you make. That's not, we don't put it in the church bulletin. Not, I don't think we should, by the way, but so that is just, yeah, people keep money very private. And we do at our church what you do, with the pastors do not know. We don't know how much people give. I think that's a good practice. That I
I
think
agree completely.
that could lead to problems. So it's good not to know. But
Oh,
but
yeah,
I
completely.
think as disciples of Christ, we should be open and accountable to others if people say to us, "Are you giving generously?" You know,
Mm,
and I think it's good if a church knows. You know, you have certain people counting money. Oh, this person doesn't give anything. That's a
sure.
problem.
Yeah.
That's a big problem. I
So,
don't know what it means to be committed to a church.
well, and I was going to ask you this on that. Do you think it should at least be part of our discipleship of one another to bring questions like that of, hey, tell me how your giving's going. What are you giving to? How frequently? Are you giving joyfully? Is it do you think that we could maybe normalize that a little bit more?
I think that's a great question. I absolutely think that would be helpful. It's a good reminder. You know, I guess we don't have checkbooks anymore, but whatever, you know, when we look at our expenses, that's, I mean, Jesus talks a lot about riches, right? How are we
A
using our
ton.
money? Are we using our money for the kingdom? Are we just trying to live the comfortable American lifestyle? Is our
Hmm.
money, you know, that's an issue of lordship. Is our money ours, or does our money belong to the Lord? Is He the Lord of our money? And I think it's good to be reminded without being legalistic, right? But to say,
Right. Right.
God owns all your money. What does He want you to do with it? If you buy a nice car, I'm not going to say that's sin, but did you seek the Lord about that before you bought it? That's all,
Hmm.
you know?
Well, and something was helpful for me, and I'd be curious how you do this for others. It was a long time. I came to faith at 16, but it was a long time before someone actually captured giving to me as a response to what God had already gave. It was just kind of like a sort of rote spiritual practice. Just, oh yes, you become a Christian, you give this, you do this, you do this, which that didn't necessarily capture my heart. I mean, I could follow the rules, but
Sure,
capturing it
sure.
in a vision of a response of it's actually a form of worship, a form of submission. If you were to cast that to a brand new believer right now as to why you should give, I know how to give joyfully, generously, sacrificially, but the why behind it. How do you usually capture that for someone?
I would say 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, Philippians 4. What does Paul teach us? Giving. So the first thing I want to say, giving glorifies God and it gives glory to God, but connected to that, indissolubly connected. Giving increases your joy. Do you want to be joyful? What does it mean to worship God? Part of what it means is to give and to give generously. So this is a wonderful gospel motive because Paul doesn't say, give, oh, please give because we're desperate. Paul says again and again, give to increase your joy. That
Hmm.
that is amazing. I love that because it isn't like it's your duty. You have to give.
Right,
Or
right.
nor does the church sound desperate. Please, we're sinking. We're going down. We need you. No, it's never that. It's always
Hmm.
give to increase your joy. Now, I don't think it's wrong for a church to say, "Hey, it's it's October 15th. We have a budget. We're behind. We we're asking God to fulfill that need. You pray and ask the Lord to do that for our church and to think about what He'd want you to do." But we would say, and not fundamentally because it's your duty, but because it's your delight. What a joy
Hmm.
to give to the church. What a privilege. That's what I want to say. It's actually a privilege to give. And that's, don't we sense that it, when you give gifts to your kids, right? For their birthdays or
Oh, for
Christmas,
sure.
as as parents, we're so happy. We love to give to our
Hmm.
kids. It increases our joy. That's
Hmm.
the
That's a
vision
good
of
point.
giving. So
Yeah, giving to increase our joy. Well, let's tie a bow on it there because I think it's a great word. Do you have any maybe something I didn't ask or you normally are asked that you're going, oh, we need to touch on this real quick before you go as it relates to a word on giving?
I think I touched on all of it. Yeah, this has been great. Thanks, Jamie.
Oh, well, I thoroughly enjoyed getting to meet you, even though virtually, digitally, maybe it doesn't count, but I've enjoyed it. And so thankful for you and your ministry and writing. Encourage any of our people listening on Downline, go to Amazon, Schreiner. You'll find a plethora of books, and you'll be helped along your way into growing both biblically and theologically. Dr. Tom Schreiner, thanks for joining us.
It's been great to be with you.
We thank you for listening to this episode of the Downline Podcast. Please subscribe, give us 5 stars, help us to get this content out to as many people as possible as we continue to partner with men and women in the Great Commission as we seek to make disciples as a lifestyle for a lifetime.